The Return of A Nagus by V.J. Bartlett. Read by Hazel Wilson. Chapter 1. Return and Capture. Thanks to Emperor Morgan, long patrols along the dynasty's borders were the pits. Space Patrolman Frederick yawned until his canine-like jaws creaked. He would have been one of the first to admit that it had not been perfect under Empress Avril, but at least the enforcers and the patrolmen had been a respected and trusted set of organisations. Frederick smiled when he thought of the days when most of the force had been Kesters like him, all loyally serving the Empress and ready to swear loyalty to the next Alpha, her daughter Raquel Rasan. Frederick gazed listlessly at the asteroid field, slowly drifting past on the left of his small chaser-class Navan craft as its engine lazed towards idle. Now it was all the old crew of Kesters could do to survive. Morgan didn't trust anyone who had shown signs of loyalty to the Avril family, so, piece by piece, the old crew had been moved off to the gradually de-equipped long patrols. Frederick snorted sourly as he made sure he saw nothing beyond asteroids. He knew exile when he saw it. It seemed to him that Morgan trusted no one beyond those scaly brutes known as the Skilleths and their dead-eyed rulers, the mage priests. Frederick shook his head. Only 22 years to undo a civilization millennia old, and it had all started here, in the borderlands near the galactic core. Talaris, the old veteran, was a fair fang at the howling, and his tales of that deadly and dark time could keep the entire barrack captivated for hours as he spoke of the coming of the Nagus, Narka Victor. A renegade of awesome power, Narka Victor had led his army through this quiet backway and had plunged as deadly as a viper's fang into the dynasty, slaughtering, capturing or corrupting any and all in his path. Even the Rosinantes, the master of the fey arts of Zikar, had been helpless against him, having finally met a Nagus whose purpose burned beyond mere greed and ambition. A Nagus who had burnt with a righteous, freezing fury that had matched or even bested the Rosinantes' belief that they did what was right. Frederick often wondered how much a mighty being could be brought low at the very moment of his victory on Englanzia, capital of this dynasty, struck down by a Rosinante apprentice. What had the boy's name been again? Frederick concentrated. Andrew something. Something about sight. Farsight, that was it. Andrew Farsight, the boy who had struck down a god. Frederick smiled and shook his head wryly. How, when it seemed like they had a chance of repairing the damage done by the Nagus, could it have gone so wrong, so damn fast? Frederick gazed at the asteroids, mentally marking each one with one of the ills that had afflicted the dynasty in the last 20 years since the Nagus fall, and then imagining each one being blasted apart. First, Empress Avril being fatally poisoned just as the news of the Nagus defeat was breaking. Then, Morgan usurping the throne. The only good news that had come out of that was Raquel managing to escape the palace alive. Come to think of it, that had been with Andrew's help as well. Following up on that had been the acceptance into the dynasty of the Skilleths, and it had all been rounded off by the dissolution of the Rosinantes. At least that had opened the eyes of some of the Congress to Morgan's true nature. They had fled before Morgan had sensed their defection and set the Skilleths on them. Frederick hoped that they had made it to Raquel and hoped that they were numbered among the rogues, but he'd never really know. Just as nobody really knew what had happened to the Narka Victor's body, seeing as it couldn't be found that last battlefield. Frederick yipped in sudden amusement, as it struck him that the Nagus had managed to do one good thing in his existence: give Frederick and his pack a good mystery to gnaw over when they were trying to kill their off-duty time. Granted, the idea of Narka Victor still being alive was preposterous. No, Frederick agreed with the majority. Narka Victor was long dead and long may he rot. Frederick was the first to see that they were wrong. It started with the steady background blipping on the radiation monitor, picking up pace, and then the asteroids around Frederick started jittering, their steady drifting becoming something more erratic, more spasmodic. Frederick stared at them, and then steered his Navarre craft around. What he saw flying inexorably past was the asteroid field, left him gasping as if his cockpit had just been breached. 14 Behemoth-class Sarcosuch craft were entering Dynasty flight space, their hulls mottled and pitted with age and repair. However, there was nothing wrong with their engines, a fact Frederick realised as his body temperature started climbing. For an instant, the instinct for survival and the knowledge that he needed proof warred within him. Instinct won the fight, and Frederick's hands tightened on the controls, sending his Navarre craft racing away amongst the asteroids, praying as he did so that the rocky bodies would absorb enough of the radiation wash that the Sarcosuch were producing. His Navarre craft was shielded enough that it would protect him from the radiation of a sun, but not 14, and not at this close range. Dashing deeper into the asteroid field, Frederick began to relax as the radiation monitor began to stabilise, and then he noticed that the asteroids around him were bulging like mud in a geyser pool just before the eruption. "What the—" he managed. The asteroid in front of him exploded like an unpierced tuba in a cooker unit, splattering its muddy internals across the viewport, shaking his craft and spinning it towards the other asteroids as they started to burst. "Freck!" Frederick yelled as his craft bucked and twisted around him like a maddened war dragon trying to lose its rider. A large mass loomed in the scanner's scope. With a final lurch, the Navarre craft thudded into the side of the dirt-formed asteroid and stuck, its engine stalling with a cough. Frederick leant over the controls and fought to regain control of his breathing. Only when his heart stopped trying to beat its way out through his ribs did he sit up. "What the freck was that?" he asked the galaxy in general. Much later he was very glad that it hadn't answered just then. Narka Victor stood on the command bridge of his vessel as it led the arrowhead formation of the Sarcosuch craft. Around him the bridge murmured with the quiet bustle of controlled haste, the monitor officers watching their scans intently as they swept the abyss around them. "Phase 1 complete, sir," Captain Nelson reported. "Excellent." The word was congratulatory. The tone was as cold as the void outside the craft. Captain Nelson felt no distress due to this. The Calcaran signal line had passed the reasons down over the last half-year. During that time, Captain Nelson had watched as his ultimate commander had gathered the Arctic darkness around him, sealing himself away, becoming the black figure of awe-inspiring power that stood behind the blank-featured, horned battle helmet. For an instant, as he turned back to his work, Captain Nelson wondered what thoughts now moved behind those piercing yellow eyes. Then he decided he'd rather not know, the pressures of Narka Victor considered, as the Calcaroon went into the first mission that had brought their entire might to bear. Narka Victor reached out his overlong, four-jointed fingers and rested them on the console in front of him. He let his Z-Car ability uncurl through his ship. He felt the heightened anticipation of the men as they went about their tasks. They knew it was time to make or break, time to step from the shadows that had sheltered them for 20 years, time to leave that dark sanctuary and stand or fall. No more running, no more hiding. The touch of a familiar mind twitched against Narka's perception. He reached out and their thoughts joined to make the link. "Master?" came the concerned thought. "At ease, Harper," Narka's cold thought assured. "We are ready." "Not all of us," Harper's mind voice replied, and twitched their shared perception towards a disgruntled mind making its way towards the bridge. Narka didn't say anything, but he broke the link and withdrew his Z-Car sense back inside his mind. When Colonel Peter McGolwan marched onto the bridge, Narka did not turn. "You wish to speak with me?" It was not a question, and Narka's voice lacked any emotion. "Our spies have reported that the Imperial muster has increased in pace. The attack on Scale will be earlier than expected," the man replied in his roughened voice. When the Imperials move to attack Scale, they will find an empty planet. I have every faith in Lord Hong's organisational skills, and we will have completed our mission long before the Imperials are ready. Narka's voice was still flat and empty, giving no hint of emotion. Surely certainty. Enough! Narka's voice dropped in volume, and the man stepped back, recognising danger. The Highlander, Colonel Peter McGolwan, was one of nature's discontents. The son of an imperial general, he had expected his father's patronage when he entered the armed forces, only to be sorely disappointed. Though he was an able soldier, Peter lacked the social skills needed to gain the true respect of his men necessary for promotion or indeed retainment, especially in the patronage-driven system Morgan had created. When the Kalkarum had picked him up, it had been from the gutter, but never one to be thankful. His discontent had grown rapidly, and Narka knew the man was by now hated throughout the ranks for his habit of venting his spleen on others. He wondered if he should demote the man and replace him. Many would think the timing poor, even foolish, but Narka preferred it that way. If a commander of such high rank was lost in action, he would leave the position unfilled until the next campaign. It increased the thirst of the next rank down to prove themselves, and they would lead with heightened competence, but demotion. Narka's overlong fingers drummed for a beat. "Colonel." "Yes, sir." "I want a personal report on the Sector 7 wormhole generator. Oversee the transportation of the boarding party." "Yes, sir." As the man left, a large falcon-like bird drifted over to Narka, landing on the top edge of the control panel. "Methinks his malcontent will drive him to desperate acts some day most soon," it said in a deep, harsh voice. "He should never have held the rank he does." Narka spoke almost below a whisper, his words only for the bird's hearing. "Why doth he, then?" "The mission could not have succeeded with 3 majors. It needed a single commander. Hesbit had not served long enough, and I believed the ranks would see Dean as too young, too inexperienced, despite the fact he was, in many ways, better qualified. It will be the last time I let politics dictate my choices." The bird turned to gaze at the wall-sized screen that showed the surrounding stars. His name was Hunter, and he had been Narka's companion for longer than the Kalkarum had existed. He was a mutant raven raptor, oversized for his species, and rejected by his flock for that difference. It had been while Narka had been recuperating after the last battle that he had released Hunter from the trap he was entangled in. That act had triggered the instinct to flock in Hunter's mind, and he had never left. Narka, in turn, found Hunter useful, and being useful, having a purpose and a sense of belonging, was a desire in the hearts of all rejects. Silent in the depths of space, the menace of the Kalkarum sped on until Narka judged that they were closing with their prey. "Narka Victor to Major Dean." He tapped the clasp of his velvety cloak. "Yes, sir," the data link sent through the reply. "Launch your ship. Make sure she doesn't escape." "Yes, sir." 3 levels down in one of the Sarkasach's massive hangars, Major Dean smiled as he lowered his hands to the controls of the ship, the Wraith. The Predator-class Fire Demon 5, the sleek midnight blue craft, was Dean's pride and joy. It was in this craft that he had outflown Narka Victor himself, the act that had gained him and his crew's invitation to join the Kalkarum. As tall as a house, its 2 long, smoothly forward-sweeping arms perfectly balanced, Dean's ship could and had been home for weeks on end, but their migratory lifestyle had ended with that invitation. "Come, my beauty, let's hunt," he crooned under his breath. As the hangar doors slid open, he gunned the engine, and without the slightest tremor, guided his ship free. Like a minnow against a whale, the Wraith arched from the Sarkasach. "Veil up," Dean commanded his co-pilots, and back on the screen of the Sarkasach's command bridge, the Wraith vanished. "View from the Wraith," Narka commanded, and the screen flickered as the viewmaker connected to the Wraith's computer system. Narka's fingers drummed just the once at the reminder of how old his vessel was. Travelling at nearly the speed of light, the Wraith powered through space, Dean's first co-pilot monitoring the scans. 2 degrees counterclock and 3 down, he reported. The momentary spike on the iron trail monitor indicated that something else was out there. Iron filters holding steady, 100%. Dean didn't need any more details. He and his first co-pilot had been together so long they had undertaken the blood ritual of the Dormers. They were bonded closer than brothers. Dean homed in on the tiny signals the iron monitor was detecting, and as his co-pilot called them out. "Sir," he data-linked Narka Victor. "We are within half a light hour, slowing into the attack run." "El Father be with you," Narka acknowledged, and he turned to the communications officer. "Relay the order, spread out and close with the prey." The arrowhead formation of the Sarkasachas were holding, spread out and forward like 2 wings, and accelerated. "What if Vicereine Raquel doth not travel on board the Censor?" Hunter asked suddenly. "If she is not, then the Trey brothers will suffer." The words were said with no feeling, but they were the most ominous promise that could be uttered. Vicereine Raquel was the only passenger allowed on the command bridge of the Censor, but she had not made use of it many times over the years she had been hiring the ship to sneak around the Dynasty. Captain Alan Dowley had been a member of the Shippers Guild, and when Morgan had abolished that organisation, he had gone independent. As such, he was open to business deals that earned him large amounts of cash. Now Raquel was wondering if her normal absence was why it had taken her this long to realise Dowley could do with a lesson in manners towards his computer technician, Juniper Martha Cooper. "And after you've done that, run the virus scans through that new veiling device you bought from Xantos before you bring it online," he barked at her, his thick black moustache bristling. "I always run the virus scan through any new computer component before I bring it online, sir." Juniper's reply had the faintest edge of forced calm. "And the day I don't order you to will be the day you'll neglect your duty and will be trapped in a dead ship waiting for it to become our coffin," he snarled at her and strode off the bridge. "Tell me," Raquel said slowly, going over to lean on the ship's rib beside Juniper's console. "Is Dowley always this friendly, or is he having a good day?" "Dowley?" the younger woman said dispiritedly. "He never changes, at least not towards me." "Any particular reason, or are you just his favourite whipping dog?" "I'm a half-breed." Juniper's gaze didn't wander from the computer readout. "My father was a human, my mother was not. As far as Dowley is concerned, that means I'm an abomination that ought to have been destroyed, preferably before birth." "Dear light," Raquel sighed. "I thought that sort of viewpoint had died with Rojeth Road all those centuries ago." "Believe me, it hasn't," Juniper smiled bitterly. "Captain Dowley isn't the only one I've come across." Raquel studied the young woman more closely. The most notable sign that she wasn't totally human was the colour of her eyes, amber yellow. Beyond that, the only other notable mark was Juniper's fingers. The bones were slightly overlong, giving her an extremely large span as she gracefully manipulated the computer system. The first time they had met, it had been a shock to them both. Raquel had seen her younger self coming towards her, and Juniper had thought for an instant that she was seeing a ghost. Though Raquel was 18 years the senior, they could have passed for sisters, despite Raquel having been made stern by years of solemn duty. Both of them were medium height, slimly built with oval faces that were not classically beautiful but strikingly featured, especially with their auburn, near-copper hair. Raquel suddenly realised that she'd met Juniper 9 years before, but after the first time, in which she had established that there was no blood link between them, she'd never bothered to talk to her. She'd been too busy organising the rogues, planning strikes and counter-strikes. Was she, like Guy Leon Xantos so often accused her, losing touch with the people she led, the people who risked their lives for her. The realization that the man could have spoken the truth at once shamed her and then angered her. The imagined smug look of mocking triumph on his face, if he ever found out about this, set her hands to clenching. To have to admit he'd been right would be galling to the extreme. So if you don't mind me asking, what was your mother if she wasn't human? Raquel asked, deciding to rectify the situation before it could be discovered. An El Childer, Juniper glanced up at Raquel's puzzled frown. Their planet was beyond the Dynasty boundary, towards the galactic centre. Still is, I suppose. Pirates raided it for slaves years ago, and she was one of those taken. I've tried to imagine what it must be like for her, to be ripped from a society in the era of bows and arrows and thrust into a civilization where people travel between the stars. She must have thought she was among demons. Raquel could imagine only too well. She had felt a similar sensation when she had confronted Morgan, only to find that he had the backing not only of the Congress but also of the mage priests. Seeing those things standing in the halls of her mother's palace, in the centre of the imperial dynasty, she had felt as if every truth she'd ever known had been destroyed in front of her, as if they had never been true, could never be true. To be ripped from your home, to see your family murdered, to be stripped of every living dignity, must have been so similar. What happened to her? She was bought by a scrap merchant who I knew as Master Tanzo. He was a kind master, and when I came along his wife took a shine to me. My mother, you see, adapted to life in the dynasty, even married a fellow slave. She was the bravest woman I'll ever know. Juniper's hands stilled. Raquel waited. My coming killed her, one of those freak medical blips that still happen sometimes. As I said, the bravest woman I'll never know. I'm just thankful that my father could see me as her continuation instead of her killer. I never once doubted his love for me. Juniper's hands started flickering over the console again. Raquel tried to think of something to say, finally settling on bringing the conversation back to its beginning. Doesn't your father object to how Dowley treats you? Surely. My father doesn't know. Juniper abruptly stood and started pacing the bridge, glancing at the other computer screens. He's dead, as is Master Tanzo, his wife, and everyone else. My God, what happened? The Skilleths, Juniper said heavily, leaning over a console, arms braced on the edge. For 16 years I believed myself a slave born to slavery, as the cell needed me to believe. Master Tanzo was a Shardin agent, as was his wife and my father. They agreed together that I should be raised as an agent, so Tamer, that was Tanzo's wife, let me believe the extra training I received was due to her influence. What extra training? Computers for the most part. Juniper started balancing the drives against each other. There is nothing about computers that I don't know or can't find out, and I doubt there is a computer in the galaxy with security strong enough to keep me out. But I also learnt other things: self-defense, concealment, gunnery, and information gathering. She straightened and turned to face Raquel. Outwardly, the cell worked for Morgan, but Master Tanzo was a spy of yours. I dread to think of what being a double agent must have cost him, but it kept us safe until I was 16. Juniper walked back to her console, sat and began to work again as she answered Raquel's tacit question, her mouth a thin, angry line. Someone betrayed us. The night they destroyed the cell was a night of blood. The Skilleths dropped troops on us from orbit, and they had no concept of mercy. I saw one bite through. She swallowed and didn't finish. The only reason I survived was because I was hidden in a skimmer wreck at the bottom of a junk pile. I spent the whole night terrified that they would set fire to the scrapyard. When they left, I was able to search for survivors. A pointless exercise, mostly. My father lived just long enough to tell me where my true identification disc was hidden. She fell silent for several minutes. The only sound on the bridge the computer's hum and whir as it assimilated the data Juniper entered. What then? Raquel asked quietly. The censor limped in 3 days later, nearly crippled by a virus, and although he hated my mixed blood, I managed to force Captain Dowley to give me a written promise that he would take me on as a crew member if I cleaned the computers. Juniper snorted a bitter smile. 5 hours later, the crew held him to that promise, and here I am, 9 years later, sick to the gills of Captain Alan Dowley. I'm going to take the first opportunity to leave his service that comes along. I just hope it's soon, or I'm going to... She worked with a renewed vigour that was almost a frenzy. Raquel stood, unsure of what to do or say. How could she offer words of comfort when this was the living price of a civil war she'd helped perpetrate? I didn't want to drag up such memories, she faltered. You're the first person I've ever told, Juniper admitted quietly. I was taught how to hide my emotions if I needed to, but 9 years is a long time. A very long time to hold the walls in place. I'm tired of pretending, of hiding what I am. Thank you for being in as much danger as I am. Raquel wondered why she felt comforted by that, when she should have been the one giving comfort, but she recognised the truth of Juniper's words. They were both in equal danger if they were discovered. Juniper's hands suddenly stilled, and then ran spider-like over the input pad, her whole posture tense. Bridge to Captain Dowley. She jabbed the data link. Yes, came the irritable reply. There are 14 ships coming in from the starboard side. They are at least a light hour out, but the iron signatures are enormous, off the charts, still climbing, and the vessels themselves are coming fast, near light speed. Raquel's gut just had time to clench with foreboding before the first explosion threw her off her feet with the percussion of impact. On the bridge of the leading Sarkasach, Narka Victor watched with cold calculation as the sensor appeared on screen. The generators of its veils destroyed by the Wraith's first barrage of shots. The cargo ship span under the impacts, and a moment later the second deadly salvo destroyed its main engine exhaust. With that gone, the sensor's crew had no choice but to cut the engines, or they'd rapidly cook themselves. View from the city, Narka ordered, and the screen flickered. As the sensor came to a stop, dead in the water, the Wraith deveiled, hovering seemingly protectively over its prey. Narka Victor to Sector 7 wormhole generator. He tapped his data link. Yes, sir, came Major Hesbit's voice. Prepare the boarding party, and stand by on my mark.